Alright guys, how's it going? Welcome back. Today I'm in this 2013 Porsche Panamera GTS. And the question is, as always, should you buy one? I think I'm going to struggle with this video, to be honest, or at least struggle to come up with some sort of conclusion at the end. Because as much as this car's got going for it, and it has got quite a lot going for it, there are just some quite obvious issues that I can't ignore. But anyway, I'll get onto that later. Firstly, a bit of background. The Porsche Panamera has been around since 2009. This first generation ran from 2009 until 2016. It's Porsche's first attempt at a saloon car. Many consider this to be the successor to the 989 concept car from back in the late 80s, early 90s. In late 2013, the Panamera received a facelift. There were a couple of small styling differences like the new rear lights, and a few tweaks to the engine range. There are lots of models to choose from. If you want outright economy, there's the 250 horsepower 3-litre V6 turbo diesel engine. Petrol-wise, there's a 3.6 litre V6 found in the base Panamera. That produces around 300 horsepower. That's just rear-wheel drive. The Panamera 4, obviously as the name suggests, is 4-wheel drive. Then there's the Panamera S, which got a 4.8 litre 400 horsepower V8. There was even a hybrid model too. If you want ridiculous performance, there was a Panamera Turbo and a Panamera Turbo S. They produce 490 and 540 horsepower respectively. Both those models came with 4-wheel drive as standard. And last but not least is the Panamera GTS, which is the model I'm in today. That uses a 4.8 litre V8, which produces around 425 horsepower, and comes with 4-wheel drive. Gearbox wise, you could have gone with a 6-speed manual, but hardly anybody did. Most went with an automatic. There was either a 7-speed dual clutch PDK box, like the one found in this, or an 8-speed ace-in-source conventional gearbox, as found in the Tiptronic S models. When you get behind the wheel, you'll instantly forget that this car is nearly 5 metres long, because it feels much smaller. Feels like a proper driver's car, this. It just wraps itself around the driver, just as you'd expect a Porsche will. Although it's only a 4-seater, you will sit 4 adults in comfort in this car. There's lots of room. Particularly in the back, it's a really nice place to be. There's plenty of headroom, plenty of legroom, and even in the back, although the roof slopes, there's still an awful lot of headroom back there. The interior quality, as you'd expect from a Porsche, is superb. And I'm not just saying that either, it is properly top drawer. Everything feels as though it's been done to a standard rather than to a budget. Just for reference, this particular car has done 142,000 miles, and there's hardly any wear on any of the buttons, switches, handles, steering wheel. It genuinely feels as though I'm sat in a car that's only done 40, not 140. You'll note straight away that the interior of the Porsche is dominated by this centre console. It's a celebration of the button. There are buttons absolutely everywhere, which when you first get in the car will be overwhelming, but you'll soon realise that half of those buttons you only use once in a blue moon. You'll soon get to grips with it. I like it, to be honest. I'd much rather have a conventional button rather than some overly fiddly touchscreen setup. It actually helps to make this car feel sportier in a way. It's quite theatrical. You've got more buttons up here. It's a bit like being sat in the cockpit of a 747. The infotainment screen's very good. The quality and resolution for a 2013 car, I think, is excellent. You get Bluetooth hands-free and Bluetooth media streaming. It's got the Bose stereo, which admittedly was an optional extra. It does sound good. One thing I've noticed straight away, which is quite annoying, and it's true of most Porsches, there are no audio controls on the steering wheel, so you have to reach down here for it. Which I can just about understand on something like a 911 or a Cayman. You don't want those buttons to get in the way when you're hammering it around a track. But on a 4-seat luxury saloon car, is that really necessary? I think not. I also like the gauge cluster, which will be very familiar if you've been in a Porsche from this era. You get 5 very simple pods, one of which is a sat-nav screen, which means you don't have to take your eyes off the road. The seats are finished in the best materials known to man. You get a mixture of leather and suede, but it all feels high-end. Like I say, somebody sat in this seat and done 142,000 miles, and there's almost no wear on it. Can you imagine that on a Mercedes or something? There'd be a rip in the bolster straight away. As good as they are, there is one but. It's quite a big but, actually. In fact, if you've got a big but, you'll struggle to fit in these seats. They're very snug. After recently losing 35 pounds, I think I could quite accurately describe myself as having a slim build. And I'm hugged here by these side bolsters. It's quite uncomfortable. They are adjustable, but this is as wide as they'll go. You just feel quite hemmed in by it. It's as if Porsche want to remind you that you're in something built for performance, not comfort. Speaking of performance, Watch this. That's properly quick. You'll be pleased to hear that this drives and handles just as you'd expect a Porsche to. It's brilliant. The steering is almost perfect, there's almost no body roll, the throttle response is immediate, the sound of that V8 is glorious, the gear changes are quick. It's nothing short of a triumph, and I don't mean the old horrible cars. That's brutal. You know what, the fact that this has got four-wheel drive, it just means that you can plonk your foot hard on the accelerator and you know that you're not going to spin out. When you try and do that in other cars, straight away my AMG GTS springs to mind, you just end up spinning the wheels and then you have to cling on for dear life. But not in this. This one's got the optional sports exhaust, which was about £1,200 extra, and I'm glad the first owner specified it. It sounds excellent. You get a nice amount of snap, crackle and pop without it being too chavvy. As good as this PDK gearbox is, and it is very good, one thing that annoys me, when you come to a complete standstill, when you set off again, it automatically sets you off in second gear, which just feels a little bit clumsy and hesitant. You'll find yourself manually flicking down into first each time, just because it sets off much more smoothly. The rest of the characteristics of the box, though, are very good. The changes are instant, and if you knock it over into manual mode, you can change the gears yourself using these beautifully weighted paddles behind the steering wheel. Let's give it a whirl, shall we? Down into third, there we go. Whoa! What a car. What a car. Thankfully the GTS has upgraded brakes, and you'll need them. Rear visibility is quite poor though. See, like now, the lights have just turned to green and it set me off in second, which just doesn't really feel right. Something that surprised me is the ride quality. It's quite supple. I was expecting it to be very uncomfortable and it isn't. I've been driving around all morning in comfort mode, but even if you try it in Sport or Sports Plus, which straight away firms up the suspension, it doesn't make that much difference. Not to comfort anyway. This model has the optional air suspension, which was a £1,300 optional extra. It just means that you can raise or lower the ride height. I assumed again, quite wrongly, that this one with its upgraded larger turbo style alloys, that would have some detrimental effect on the ride, but it doesn't. If it does, it's obviously negligible. I think the turbo style wheels look great, or at least they will once I've had them refurbished next week. You'll be pleased to know that unlike the 911, which this car is so desperately trying to be, there's almost no road noise. That's always my main criticism of every 911 I've ever driven. The road noise is just unbearable. But this isn't. I drove this on the motorway this morning and sat there at the speed limit. There's hardly any wind or road noise, which is something I was quite pleased about. Oh, XKR. It's quite a practical car, this. You get a very large boot at 445 litres, and because you get a hatchback, access to that space is very good. You can even fold down the two rear seats so you can carry larger items. Like I said, practical car this. In terms of running costs, anything with a Porsche badge isn't going to be cheap, but some get quite close. If you opt for the 3-litre turbo diesel, you'll average about 43 miles per gallon. Average. If you go for one of the V8s, then that figure will drop to about 23 or 24, which isn't appalling when you consider the performance on offer. The service interval is 2 years or 20,000 miles, so although Porsche servicing costs are higher than most, by the time you divide that by 2, because you only need to do it every 2 years, it will fall in line with most other servicing costs. In terms of reliability, this is one brand that I wouldn't worry too much about. They're incredibly well engineered cars. Everything's built to such an incredibly high standard, I just can't see breakdowns being that frequent. As always though, it's a complicated luxury car, so if you're looking to buy one of these used, make sure you keep a few grand back to one side for any possible repairs. And as I always say, prevention is better than the cure, so it's better to go into one of these cars with a couple of grand behind you and do all of the preventative maintenance. Well, I think that's about it then. I've talked about the performance, the build quality, the interior space, the boot space, running costs. You all thought I'd forgotten, didn't you? Should we talk about the styling? Now, styling on most cars is subjective. One person might think something's beautiful, and the next person might think that same thing is hideous. Well, on the Panamera, the styling isn't subjective. It's objectively appalling. From the front, they've tried to make the Panamera look like the 911, which does work. It's a good-looking car from the front. But from every other angle, it is grotesque. The more I think about it, the more it annoys me, because the rest of the car is so good, and it's let down by its lazy design. This was Porsche's first attempt at a saloon car. There were no rules. They didn't have a previous model that they couldn't deviate too much from. They could have literally done anything. And instead, what did they do? They photoshopped a 911, stretched it and stuck 2 more doors on. And then to make the boot space more appealing, they've given it a hunched Quasimodo fat back. It's gross. Every time I look at the back end, I just think, what a pity. It could have been so good, this car. When you take a pretty 2-door sports car and then elongate it and whack in 2 more doors, it just ruins it. The proportions are off. You can imagine the designers of this car going back to the meeting after they'd come up with their initial design, which must have taken them all of about 5 minutes. Why did nobody pull them up on it? Why did nobody say, hang on a minute, Hans, that's horrendous. Get back to the drawing board. Somebody, in fact many people I imagine, signed this off. How? Why? They all need an eye test. I was chatting with my mate last night and I told him that I'd got a Panamera coming in parts exchanged against my Aston Martin Rapide. And we got chatting about who might buy one of these cars, you know, who the Panamera actually appeals to. And we just couldn't figure it out. If you're into cars, if you're a proper petrol head, then you'd go for a BMW M5 or an M6 Grand Coupe, or an Audi S7 or S8 or RS7 or E63 Mercedes or CLS 63 Mercedes. There's so much choice, all of which are better looking than the Panamera. If you're into cars but you need something practical, then you just buy an RS6 Avant. If you're a family man and you want something that's quick and you also want the Porsche badge, then you just buy a Cayenne Turbo. We just couldn't figure it out at all. Eventually though, we boiled it down to somebody who's an out-and-out Porsche fan, somebody who's incredibly wealthy, somebody who perhaps has a nagging wife who doesn't like the 911 and keeps telling them to get something more sensible, and somebody whose eyes don't work. It's a great car, this. It's great to drive, the build quality is superb, the performance is breathtaking. There are economical models if that's a concern. It really does tick a lot of boxes. But ultimately I just couldn't see myself owning one, because my stomach isn't strong enough. There's no way I could walk out to this every morning and not bring my breakfast up. That's a pity. Used prices here in the UK start around £20,000, which is excellent value for money. There are no two ways about it. When you think about how much car you actually get for your money, then perhaps it's the cheaper used Panameras which make most sense. Perhaps you could overlook the hideous exterior. So, I think that's all I can say on the matter. As always, I've been brutally honest. Hope you enjoyed watching. Give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't done already. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I'll leave the link below. If you've got any comments or questions, let me know and I'll do my best to get back to you. If you're interested in getting into used car business, then check out my online course. I've built an online platform with nearly 100 videos which explain every single aspect of the motor trade. How to start, branding, funding, where to get cars from, it's all there. And there are regular Q&A sessions, so if you've got any questions along the way, then sign up for the course and you can ask them. So, cheers guys, I'll see you next time.